So let's dive into this. We're going to start with some takeaways, pretty broad. Then we're going to get more granular. We're going to put the microscope on it, and we're going to zoom in. And we're going to start in the SEC East. Our biggest SEC East takeaways so far through 2020. We're through, 5 weeks now. And there you see the SEC Eastern Division standings. If you're watching on the YouTube side, Colin's showing them to you. It's Georgia, Florida, hello, Kentucky, Tennessee, and then you got South Carolina. It is Cocktober, by the way, so be careful. You never know what can happen in Cocktober. Ask Auburn. Ask Georgia last year. And then you got Missouri down there. I think a pretty underrated team right now with Bazelak at quarterback. And Vanderbilt is Vanderbilt. So let's start with Georgia, and let's talk about some quarterback suspicions that have been confirmed. I don't think it's all that hard to figure out what the biggest takeaway from Georgia is right now. Now listen, sometimes if you watch a game like we saw Saturday night, where Georgia got, as it turns out, handled on the final scoreboard by Alabama, you say to yourself, oh man, that hurts. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the mood tracker. But to me, I don't think it hurts. It hurts to lose. No one likes to lose. But I think you want to know the truth about yourself, and you want to know the truth as early as possible. That's why a lot of these major programs schedule major out-of-conference games early in the season. Some of it's for recruiting, some of it is for strength of schedule, but I also think they just want to find out what their weaknesses are. Remember, we always use the dam metaphor, and we use the dam metaphor in that every dam's got cracks in it, every team's got cracks. You just got to put the water pressure against it, and you got to find out where the cracks are. Well, you could play a bunch of high school teams early in the year, and you could look great. That doesn't mean your cracks aren't there. You're just going to get painfully exposed later in the year. So what's the crack? Well, it's pretty obvious. It was a really big crack. It is a lower ceiling on offensive potential because of limitations at quarterback. We know that. It's been confirmed now. So now you kind of hit the reset button, and if you're Georgia, okay, we know what our weaknesses are. We understand what the truth about ourselves are. We know what our identity is, and we know what we have to do to ultimately get where we want to be. Now, let me tell you, there's not a lot of information out there to be had about the status of JT Daniels right now. I would tell you if I knew otherwise. I don't. And trust me, very, very few people outside of friends and family around the Georgia program know what the status of JT Daniels is. JT Daniels, of course, is the transfer quarterback, comes in from Southern Cal in the offseason. Jamie Newman's there. Jamie Newman opts out. And DeJuan Mathis doesn't work out in week one. And now Stetson Bennett, a guy who was running with the fours a couple of months ago, he's the quarterback. Obvious limitations there. And so the question has become, when is JT Daniels going to be ready? The presumption out there that I agree with is they have to have JT Daniels, a healthy JT Daniels, a capable Daniels, if they're going to maximize their chances of contending for national championship. Now, that's what remains to be seen. I have a sneaking suspicion, and I talked to some people today that kind of feel the same way, that we're getting pretty close to seeing him play. The follow-up question is going to be, at what level is he playing? Because I think it may be a little dangerous to expect him to just pop out of the gate, and he's playing at a 5-star level. This is a guy who's coming off a knee injury. He's been cleared, but he hasn't played meaningful football this year yet, hadn't played in quite a long while. But I will say this before we move on from Georgia. One of the questions that's been answered is offensive coordinator. Todd Monken, and I was talking about this on Twitter and on the Dogs 24/7 site earlier today, I thought he called a great game the other night. I know they lost 41-24. I thought he called a really good game. Good balance. There were open receivers. There were a lot of first downs that were more scheme first downs instead of a guy just out-athleted someone to make a first down. So I feel good about him. Can we feel good about quarterback? We'll see. Let's move on to Florida. I think right now my biggest takeaway for Florida is they better use this break they have right now that was unscheduled to figure themselves out on defense. And they better come out of this break looking a whole lot better defensively. Dan Mullen was very vocal. Coming out of that Texas A&M loss, he was very vocal about his defense and made it sound like he was going to kind of get his hands dirty a little bit and talked about it doesn't matter what our playbook looks like. It doesn't matter how exotic our calls are. If guys don't grasp how to execute it, then it doesn't matter how cool it sounds. It doesn't matter how thick the playbook looks. None of that matters. And so here's the false takeaway that I think some people got from that Alabama-Georgia game the other night. I had some buddies text me even during the game, watching Alabama with success throwing the ball on Georgia, and they said, ooh, I think this kind of makes Florida the favorite in the East, because if Alabama can throw on them, that means Florida can throw on them. Well, it may, but let me tell you a couple of aspects of that Alabama team I know exist that I don't necessarily know exist at Florida. Number one, an elite pass-protecting offensive line. Mac Jones was given a lot of time the other night. Number two, an elite downfield passing attack. Now, I'm not going as far as the dudes over at Pro Football Focus and telling you everything outside of, your quarterback's kind of trash, secret trash, Kyle Trask. No, I'm not going that route. But I am saying Alabama stretches the field a whole lot more than Florida. Dan Mullen is a masterful tactician, masterful offensive coordinator. But, one of the allegations in that Pro Football Focus piece was on the money, and that is Florida to this point, and this is no knock against them, but to this point this year, a lot of their explosive plays have been a lot of underneath stuff that athletes have turned into explosive plays. Now, the reason I mention that is not to take away from what they've done, but the reason I do mention it is, well, if you automatically assume that's happening against Georgia, you're kidding yourself. Everything's contested when you play Georgia. Everybody's defended underneath when you play Georgia. So you may complete some stuff, but you're not popping it for 25 more yards consistently against them, which brings me back to the point about defense. You have got to be able to stand up against their run. Because if you don't get a big lead on them, so outside of that possibility, like Alabama did the other night, and you're not forcing Stetson Bennett to play catch-up, or maybe it's JT Daniels by that point. But if you're not forcing that, then they're running the ball on you at will. And if you can't stand up to the run better than Florida's front has so far, I don't know that that's nearly as decided. In fact, I think maybe the balance of power in the SEC East still remains tilted to Georgia if that's the case. Now, here's what could happen. Florida is not void of talent. Florida is not void of really smart defensive coaches. So what could happen is they could come out of this break and look like a different unit over there, and they have things figured out. At that point, that's when that comparison becomes a whole lot more interesting. Let's go to Knoxville, Tennessee. Tennessee is right now in 2020. And Tennessee's got a couple of losses. The last one was very ugly. But I'm looking at 2020. And Jeremy Pruitt's certainly looking at 2020. But as I look at 2020, I am thinking to myself, they better get 2021 and beyond figured out. And they need to use some of this year to do so. Now, again, this is not how a coaching staff can afford to think. But I think you can accomplish what I said while also focusing on the here and now. And what I'm talking about here is, I'm not one to punt on teams after they lose a couple of games. I talked about this in the Late Kick Extra podcast the other day. A lot of times, once teams are eliminated from the SEC championship picture or the playoff picture, you just kind of cast them to the side and, we'll talk about them again when it comes time for bowl season picks. No, I mean, there's a lot still to be gleaned from Tennessee, and there's a lot still to watch from Tennessee. First and foremost, and get ready for it because it's coming up pretty soon, is who they start at quarterback this Saturday against Alabama. And there's a lot of debate on this. I didn't think there was much debate to be had, but I was proven wrong because a lot of people have debated me on this. I do not think, obviously, Jarrett Guarantano is the future at quarterback here. He can't be. But I also think that if anyone on that roster is, it's Harrison Bailey. And you saw him late in the game against Kentucky. Now, what my point was, listen, if you're not going to contend for the East, why in the world not get a head start on finding out what you have, for better or for worse, with Harrison Bailey? Because if he's not the guy, and I don't know that you would find that out this year, but I mean, if you start to get the sense that, I'm not completely bought in on him, well, you still have to address quarterback. So you could either hide him and then start figuring out next year, or we can start figuring it out right now. Now, the retort I got was, well, you can't just be throwing him to the wolves against Alabama. Why? It's not middle school. I mean, that's a scholarship quarterback. I know what the dynamic is. I know he's missed time. I know they had COVID-related stuff. But listen, did they put him on the football field the other night? They did. Okay, that means he's healthy. He's good enough to play. They trust him enough to be on the field. So if those boxes are checked, then here's the next question I ask. Have you watched Alabama's defense this year? This is not exactly a vintage unit. So I remember once upon a time, a kid by the name of Josh Dobbs getting his first start against this same team in a much better defense, and things turned out kind of okay for him. So this is not diaper time. It's not pacifier time. This is the SEC. If you're on scholarship down here and you're in uniform on that sideline, then you should be trusted to be put in a game, and they've already put him in the game. So I'm talking about 2021 and beyond here when I say I want to see Harrison Bailey against Alabama, point blank. We'll see how they choose to go about that there. Let's talk about South Carolina and Kentucky kind of simultaneously here, Colin. I don't know what this will look like in terms of video, but I thought the same thing for both teams. So Carolina just came off a win against Auburn. Kentucky just came off a wide margin victory against Tennessee. And both of them are in a metaphorical zone that I like to call the spiderweb zone right now. Some teams qualify for this, a lot of teams don't. But when the spiderweb theory is in effect, some of you have heard me talk about this already this week, here's what it is. What it means is you possess a roster that is not going to stand up toe-to-toe against the big boys in the conference. And you also possess a roster that does not maybe necessarily possess a whole lot of game-breaking playmakers on it. But what you do have is you have the potential to play disciplined. You have the potential to force turnovers. You have the potential to be very stubborn in your offensive play calling. And essentially, you just wait someone out. So here's where the spiderweb theory comes into effect. It's exactly what Kentucky did Saturday. It's exactly what South Carolina did Saturday. These were not performances. If you didn't watch these games, Carolina did not beat Auburn by going up and down the field on them. Kentucky did not beat Tennessee by going up and down the field on them. Nor does a spider web come at you and engulf you. What a spider web does is it gets built there in the corner of a doorway, and then you walk in a dark room or outside, in the barn, and it's dark and you can't see, and you walk into that spider web. Now, the spiderweb didn't force you to do that. You walked into it, maybe voluntarily, maybe involuntarily most of the time, but you walked into it. But the point is, once you're in the spiderweb, it's really hard to get it off of you. And once Tennessee walked into that Kentucky spiderweb, they weren't getting it off. And once Auburn walked into that South Carolina spiderweb, which means once they started turning the ball over, and once Tennessee started turning the ball over, it was done. And they're sitting there just trying to pick it out of their hair, and they're brushing their arms off and stuff, and it's too late at that point. You got the spider web all over you. Well, the point is, that doesn't have to be a one-week thing. That formula is duplicable. LSU is welcoming in South Carolina Saturday. Okay, Will Muschamp a couple of weeks ago was in must-win mode, and they went to Vanderbilt, took care of business. Now they took care of business. Dare I say, we're looking at a winning streak? 3 in a row makes a winning streak, last time I checked. And last time I checked, it is still Cocktober. Anything can happen in Cocktober. I don't have a fancy name for what they're doing at Kentucky. They're just getting Mark Stoops a lifetime contract at Kentucky. That's all they're doing there. I think I was smoking a cigar and drinking on the bus after the game. So you don't think he doesn't understand how important that win was? Check out his mood after the game. But they could do that. Missouri plays Kentucky Saturday. They could do that again. Now, that's a roster that Kentucky goes toe-to-toe with and probably is superior to. But Kentucky's going to play Georgia in a couple of weeks, for example. If you don't think Kentucky isn't capable of building the spider web and having Georgia walk into it, Georgia turns the ball over a couple of times like they did against Alabama, Kentucky could beat Georgia if they do that. If they were +3 turnovers, +4 turnovers, absolutely they could do that. Carolina is a touchdown dog going to Baton Rouge this Saturday. You have no clue who's starting at quarterback for LSU. They could build a spider web down there. Spider webs are a whole lot easier to understand than talking about zone defense. So that's why I choose to do it that way.